Welcome to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast, where we hope to inspire you to embrace your God-given gifts, skills, and passions in order to lead with confidence. We want you to remember that you are fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God, and you are fully loved by Him.
You have been designed on purpose by God with unique gifts and passions in order to love and lead those around you. I'm your host, Esther Littlefield.
And I'm Esther's co-host, Holly Kane.
Together, we chat about important issues that Christian women leaders face. In addition, we interview other women just like you who lead in various roles, from church to community to business. Through this podcast, we offer you encouragement, tools, and resources to help you on your leadership journey. We are so glad you're here with us. Hey, friend, and welcome to episode 232 of the podcast. I am here with my co-host, Holly, and today we are going to talk about whether you can be a leader without an official leadership role or title. So we're going to dive in. Holly, I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so can we talk about the inspiration for this episode?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So, you're the one that brought up sort of doing a throwback to episode 2. I feel like you're the one that brought that up.
Yeah.
And in our preparation for this episode, we went back and listened to episode 2. And man, she was rough.
Painful. Don't do it, friends. Don't do it.
Very cringy. We were so scripted, weren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were new podcasters.
It was only our second episode.
It was a long time ago. We did not have our flow down pat yet.
No,
we were very prepared back in the day. I mean,
every word was scripted.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. We knew what we were doing.
Our episode 2 was the title was What is Leadership?
Yeah.
And so we kind of talked through that, what we believe leadership is, what it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about women in leadership. We kind of hit on a bunch of key things in that episode. And, we realized it's been almost at this point, almost 6 years since we started the podcast.
Oh, it's crazy.
We may or may not have learned a few things along the way.
I hope we have.
And we have also experienced leadership in various ways throughout the years. And so, we thought we would revisit this and specifically dive into one of the things that we talked about in that episode that we said that leadership is not having a title or role necessarily. Yeah. I mean, it can be, but we said it doesn't have to be that. And so we just thought, maybe we should talk about that and what that means, what it looks like, how it looks for us right now, and kind of dive into that, because I know that's been something that's come up. Some of the guests we've had on the podcast over the years, as well as some of our listeners, have shared, well, I don't feel like I can be a leader because either I don't have a lot of experience or because I don't have a role, a title, nobody's like told me I'm a leader. So can I do leadership?
I think that over the years, we sort of asked this question. We kind of, what do you think leadership is? We've asked a lot of people to define that and sort of what they feel leadership is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think in the episode, back in episode 2, we talked about this and we gave the very dictionary definition. Holly read it word for word.
That's my most shining moment of that episode is reading that definition word for word.
Yeah. But we also referenced John Maxwell, who is obviously like one of the top, leaders in the leadership space, one of the top authors. He's just written so much great wisdom around leadership. And he really talks about leadership as influence and this idea of the fact that you have to earn leadership. It's about being able to influence other people, to do something, to think a certain way, to take action. And it's not the idea of being, quote unquote, like a boss or somebody who's simply telling other people what to do. So that's where, we went in episode 2. We talked through that idea of what leadership is.
I think, too, part of the reason that, one of the things we've had is a lot of guests on the show that have
would categorize themselves as an unlikely leader or a reluctant leader. And I think part of that is because we have created in our minds, or those people we all have created something in our minds of what a leader is, which is why I think it was really important for us to say what a leader is not.
Yeah.
Right. And so oftentimes when we have people sort of self-indicate that they are a reluctant leader or would have never dreamed of it, didn't ask for it, it's because they see their skills, their giftings as either not good enough or doesn't match up with their ideal of what a leader is. So I think that breaking that down, it was important for that first episode.
Yeah.
Or I say first episode, second episode. And I think it's kind of smashes some of those stereotypes, which I think is the whole point of the topic that we want to talk about today is without that title or role, how are you a leader?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we should hit on this idea of what leadership is not for a minute. And I know we said it in episode 2, but we also just told people not to go back and listen to that episode.
Yeah.
So let's just reiterate.
Right.
Let's reiterate what some of the things that we believe leadership is not.
Yeah.
So I'll kick it off here. I think, and I think the reason we made this list is because there are perceptions that leadership is some of these things. Like some of these things is what makes you a leader. So the first thing is that leadership is not just being the boss. You know, it's not just somebody who actually has a role or a title that says, hey, I'm in charge of this group of people. That doesn't make you a leader. You might have authority in that space, but it doesn't mean that you are a leader. Another thing that leadership is not is expecting everyone else to do the work.
That sounds great.
I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, I can't wait to be a leader so I could just kick back and watch everybody else do all the work. But if you have advanced into any leadership actual, title or role, you will discover that's not how it works.
Yeah. I think that another one, and actually, in my opinion, it kind of is reflective of the first one, but being the loudest person in the room does not make you a leader. And so when you said simply being the boss, I really wanted to say, or being bossy does not make you a leader. I know lots of women in leadership have been called bossy.
Yeah.
So,
and that's, I think a lot of our guests have said like, oh, I was called bossy when I was a kid and now I'm a leader. Yeah. And it's like, well, yes, like sometimes when children are younger, like they may be bossy and that may be something that means they have an innate desire to kind of lead people, but that needs to be cultivated and honed into a healthy style versus just going into adulthood and being like, I can't wait to boss everybody around.
Tell people what to do.
Sometimes it is nice to do that, but
well, we always say if people would just listen to us,
I know,
and do what we say, life would be a lot easier. I think the other thing that leadership is not is just being a people person. You have those people that can talk to anybody, can kind of get. Oftentimes they can just get people to do things.
Yeah, like they're very charismatic.
Yes.
Their top strength finder might be woo.
Yeah.
And so they can actually, they can engage people and get people on board with something, but that doesn't, being a people person, being an extrovert, any of those things doesn't necessarily mean you also are a good leader.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing is that it's not about demanding or expecting respect. That goes along with the whole being a boss thing. Like you can't just go and demand it. It's also not having all the answers. Like leaders don't have to have all the answers. And I think people tend to feel like if they are leading something that they need to have it all figured out. And that's a huge lesson that I've learned over the years is actually people will respect you more if you acknowledge that you don't have it all figured out
Yeah.
And if you acknowledge your humanity and your weakness and say, hey, you know what? I'm still working on that myself. I'm not sure. I'll get back to you. Like just being open that you don't have it all figured out.
Yeah.
And to go along with that, like it's also not being perfect.
Right.
Yeah, you don't
I think
have to
there's
keep yourself always buttoned up perfectly.
right. And there's a sense of vulnerability that we're kind of talking about, which
Yeah.
in the classic leader sort of stereotype, that's not found. In that classic sort of leadership thing, you have someone that's very, assured and, knows lots of things and inspires trust because they have the answers, and we just don't feel that that's really what leadership is. That may be the stereotype or might be what we think of when the word leader kind of comes in mind, but being a true leader that inspires people and is trustworthy is actually about being vulnerable. So and to go along with that, and this is actually something you can't do, but a leader is not someone who controls everything that happens, because that's a myth and an illusion anyway, because we can't control everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of going along with that, knowing everything that's needed for the task or the job. In fact, if you grow along with your position, there should always be challenges and things that you are kind of figuring out as you go along to some
Yeah.
extent,
Yeah.
or educating yourself on, or, you're not going to know everything that you need
Right.
from day one. So yeah, that's, I think that was sort of our list of what leadership is not. And kind of that final one that we really want to hit on today is leadership is not just that position or title.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah. And so why don't we just share maybe a little bit about where we're at now? I know we shared in our last episode, we gave an update, a life update. We talked about 2023, all of that.
yeah. Yeah.
And, I shared for me, like I'm no longer in an official leadership role in my work or my personal life. I'm no longer in the position of a pastor's wife. I don't have an official leadership title, and my business, I've kind of transitioned out of most of the things I was doing that involved leading other people. And so it's one thing to say that you can be a leader without a title or role, but it's different when you are actually experiencing it. And so that's really what sparked this for Holly and I was like, oh, we came to the realization that neither one of us at this point, it has any title role thing that we're doing that we're like officially leading. I mean, I guess aside from this podcast, which is sort of, we're not like interacting with other people in a way of like cultivating or encouraging people or anything like that. So yeah, what about you? What are your thoughts on that? Or where are you at with it?
Yeah. So, I mean, same sort of story with me is basically, over the past almost 6 years, we've had different roles within business, within church, personal life, that sort of thing. And we're both at a place where those are kind of gone. And I think for me, and I probably mentioned this in the last episode, it's just kind of like with the closing of my business, I kind of always, as I transitioned in and out of church things and any other leadership roles, I was just kind of like, well, I still have my business and I'm still leading there and, leading other businesses, leading CEOs and business owners. And after that was gone, I was kind of like, oh, wow, it really is gone. And it feels kind of, it feels like a stripping away of that. And I mean, we'll kind of get to it in a few minutes, but it just made me think, made me sort of, this is where the rubber meets the road of the things that I've been saying for the past 6 years. Do I believe them enough that I can walk them out? Like, I do absolutely believe to my core that you don't have to have a title or a role. But that was coming from someone who had a title or a role for a long time.
Yeah.
And so as we walk this out, What does that look like? What does that mean? How do we talk to ourselves? I think is kind of the thing that I've been struggling with. How do I have the narrative in my head of where I'm at and what does this look like? And do I have anything to say?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. I think that one of the things we have been processing too is that, if you do have an official title or role, there is a different level of responsibility
Yes.
that
Oh,
somebody
definitely.
feels, and that is a true fact that if you are whatever, let's just say you're the director of small groups at your church or whatever, like
Right.
you actually have things that you have to do and that people are looking to you and saying, okay, Holly is the director, therefore I need to go to her with questions, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Versus when you're not in an official title or role, you may you navigate it differently.
Absolutely.
You don't ultimately feel like it falls on you if something doesn't happen. So I think that it would be good to talk a little bit about what this can look like. But I wanted to share something that came up in a recent meeting, and actually funnily enough, even today I was in another meeting at work where we were having a little bit of this conversation, and we were talking about the idea of leading even if you don't have a leadership title. And I've heard it more than once at work where my own leaders and my own other leaders that aren't my direct leaders, but other people that I've heard them encourage us, like, hey, you can lead even if you're not at a leadership level in the company. And that whole idea of influence came up today, of like, if you feel that something needs to happen a certain way in your work that you're doing, and there's multiple people involved in that decision, then the way you get people on board with your perspective is through influence, right? And that involves building trust and, being able to show that you're willing to, collaborate and listen. And it is a lot more nuanced than if you are actually the boss of that group of people. It's actually, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's harder.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that, and we kind of already hit on this, but the term that I've heard at work, and I don't know if this is from a book or from a specific person, so I don't know who to give credit to, but it's the idea of positional leadership. And so positional leadership is like when you actually have that title or role, and it's like, okay, so and so is the boss, I've got to listen to that person.
Yeah.
And that, I wish I could remember precisely how it was said, but essentially it was like that kind of leadership is actually like the weakest form of leadership. Someone will listen to you because they have to, not because they want to.
Right.
And so the other forms of leadership where you actually have built trust and you have developed influence and you are pouring into people and, showing that you care and all of that is actually where you're going to get people on board with stuff, regardless of whether or not you have that title. So it's really been something that I've been thinking a lot about, and recognizing that for myself, I need to be more intentional about how I'm navigating this. And it also just gives me empathy for all the people who maybe listen to the podcast or have listened to the podcast over the years who have thought, this is hard. Like, it's not necessarily easy to lead in a healthy way if you're not the person with a title or role, but we do feel like it can be done.
I think part of what you're talking about is being a good leader is also being a good follower. Like, we always are under authority, always. No matter what level of leadership we are at, we are always under authority. And so part of, I think, what you're talking about is, when you don't have that title or role, how are you following the people that you are under well? because
Yeah.
it's easy for someone who has been in leadership before to be like, you're not doing this right. I would have done it this way, da 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 da. And it's like, that's the last thing a leader needs
Yeah.
in their position. And as someone who's been there, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's interesting that, you know, we talk about all of these things about here's how you lead well, but some of those same things are how you also follow well.
Yeah.
And it does require that nuance of figuring out, like, when is it my time to speak? When is it my time to defer? When is it my time to sort of manage up and like put the like the limelight not on me but on someone else? Or like all
Yeah.
of those different things require a high level of emotional intelligence and discernment and understanding of the situation. And it's such a more quiet form of leadership, of being able to stand behind a leader that's maybe made a mistake and encourage them and say, because there's so often times in leadership where we have naysayers.
Yeah.
And what a great encouragement to have someone else that's been there before who says, hey, look, I've been here before. I'm here to support you. Let's do this. Let's get the team behind you again or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think what you're talking about is definitely the other maybe quieter side of leadership that we haven't really maybe dove into. Is that the right way to say it? Dove?
Yeah, I think dove is right. Dived,
okay, dove
into. I don't know.
Okay.
I think that's such a good point. And I think I might have talked about it again in a way back episode when I talked about like the confident leader framework. And I talked about that part of it is following, like making sure you're following Christ so that you can lead others as you follow Christ. But I think the other part of that you're referring to is actually being willing to submit yourself to other leaders.
Yeah.
And not always think that you have all the right ideas and all the best perspectives. And, again, I found myself in a situation last week where something was happening and my leader was doing something that I didn't understand. And I was kind of like a little bit annoyed by it, but I decided to go into the meeting with her and just ask her about it and like try to understand why she was making like taking a certain approach to something.
Yeah.
And when I did, I almost like, as I was asking the question, sort of realized that I understood what she was doing. It was very weird.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh my word, she's doing this really on purpose, very strategically. And as she shared like her approach, it was like, that's brilliant. And if I had held on to the fact that I thought that we didn't need to do that way, and that was like, well, this is kind of silly, this is an extra step, that why should we take this? And then I would have missed out on learning and actually observing something that was really, really a lot of wisdom was involved in the approach. And so it's I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess I'm just saying, like, I think this idea of following well also means staying humble, right? And staying willing to ask the questions and be curious and not assume that maybe just because you have had a certain experience or leadership role in the past, like that doesn't mean that you don't have something to learn from following other people right now.
Well, and I think one of the things we've talked about before is that, being a good leader is listening and observing. And what a great case study to be under multiple different leaders when you don't have the responsibility or the mental load of your own leadership to actually like examine other people's leaderships, and not in a judgmental way, but in a way of learning exactly what you're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
I see how she did that. That's brilliant. Like, how can I like break that down in my mind so I can utilize that strategy again in the beginning, utilize that strategy again in the future.
Yeah.
to grow my own leadership. I mean,
right.
I love watching
Yeah.
other leaders at work and figuring out how they're handling things and how they're strategizing things and how they're moving all the different pieces. And when you are in your own roles, you, like I said, you have so much mental load that, you know, you may not be able to have the objectivity that you have when you don't have the responsibility or mental load to really examine it well. So yeah.
Okay.
So I have things that I've been kind of thinking about as I have been going through this and thinking about what it's like to be without a title or a role. And when I strip it all back, it comes down to two things for me. And one of the things is self-leadership and the other is influence. And we've talked about influence, but we always will have ourselves to lead and we will always have influence over others. And so you can take away roles, you can take away certain relationships or, you know, how you're sort of positioned in a community, however you want to say that. You can take all of that away and you'll still have the ability to lead yourself and you'll still have the ability to lead those you know through how you handle yourself, your integrity, your character, all of those sorts of things. And so as I think about those things that I feel like are at the very core, it makes me really think about, okay, how am I doing on these things? I don't have the role. So how am I doing on my self-leader? How am I leading myself and how am I influencing others right now? And it was kind of like humbling, perhaps. I don't know if I'm fully there yet. I don't know if I've really realized the gravity of you know, where I'm at, but I'm not leading myself well right now. And I know that that's not a good influence on those around me. And so I think sitting with that and understanding what that means and how I move forward is really important for me, perhaps before I actually have a role or a title again, because it's super easy to gloss over those things because I do have perhaps the innate skill of just jumping into a leadership role and doing well. Maybe not wonderful, but eventually at some point that will come back to bite me if I don't handle my self-leadership well. And I've talked about, I mean, I've probably mentioned it for all 231 episodes prior to this, but we all know that Holly is not good with consistency. And so I'm not good with making myself do things I don't want to do. And that is part of self-leadership, making myself do the things that are most healthy for me. Whatever those things are, you know, like relationships and certain habits and goals and, you know, even down to daily routine, you know, like if I'm not doing those things well, I'm not leading myself well. And then I'm my worst version of myself. And that gets all over everybody else. And so I've kind of come down to the thought of how we lead ourselves is how we influence others. If we're not doing that well, then our influence will not be impactful in a positive way. It will be impactful in a negative way. And that's not good. And that's not the type of leader I want to be. I want someone to be impressed with my character and my integrity and how I love and how I hold myself more than the skill of leading or the specific things that I'm just good at. I would rather have people be more influenced by my character than by the fact that I can lead a meeting well. So
that's good. So this idea of self-leadership that you're talking about reminds me of something that I used to hear back when I was doing direct sales and network marketing.
Okay.
There's always this thing that my leaders would say, or that I would hear on stage, and it was like, would you follow yourself?
Yeah.
Like, as a leader, would you follow you?
Yeah.
And that's the idea of like, if you're
Mhm.
not leading yourself well, then why would you expect anyone else to follow you?
So
If
true.
you're not the kind of leader you would look up to and say, "Oh, okay, I want to go after that. I want to join that team. I want to be
Mhm.
part of that." Then why would we expect people to do? And it's also, I think, the temptation, and I know I have been there, where I think, well, when I get that title or when I get to that role,
Yes.
then I'll really kick it into gear. Then I'll really start doing my, reading leadership books or
Yeah.
any of those habits or things that I know leaders should do, reflecting and pouring into other people and all this stuff. Like, but I'll wait until I get the role and then I'll really
Mhm.
dive in.
Yeah.
But
No.
it's like the opposite. We got to do the work
Yeah.
up front. And then when we have the opportunity to step into a official title or role, we will have that character and those habits and that
Yeah.
routine or whatever it is that we need, in place.
Yeah.
And we'll be more prepared to handle it.
And I think the sort of end game of this conversation has been played out in society for a long time. Like when we see people sort of come to fame, let's put it that way, or
Mhm.
notoriety or larger influence, especially in the age of social media, we think that that's happened overnight.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it has been years, maybe decades of slogging it out in the trenches and doing the hard steps when no one is looking.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, whether Christian or not, whether the Lord puts them in that position or, the world puts them in that position, wherever that looks like, they rise to this leadership. And we sort of all like fawn over that. Oh my gosh, that's
Mhm.
so great. Da, 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 da. But how many times have we watched that play out over a period of time, and some of those leaders fall because they didn't have the self-leadership, the character to
Yeah.
handle it.
Yeah.
And then we do have these examples of people who have done that, and still to this day their character stands.
Mhm.
I think that that's kind of the end game of what this conversation
Yeah.
is. If I
Yeah.
was thrust in where I'm at right now, and I know I have like a lot of self-work to do, but where I'm at right now, if I was thrust into the limelight,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
goodness, I would be in a ball in the corner having an anxiety attack. That's where I would be right now. Because I'm not at my best. I'm not at a place where I could handle that, and
Yeah.
it would be ugly. So I think that as I'm talking, I'm like more and more thankful that that's not where I'm at right now. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay with
Yeah.
that. Because I don't want to be found unfaithful. I don't
Mhm.
want to be found lacking character. I don't want
Yeah.
to be a detriment to Christianity or to Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I can't be a detriment to him, but you know what I mean, to
Yeah.
his,
Yeah.
like, I don't want to cause other people to fall
Yeah.
because of myself saying, well, I'm a Christian, but then acting poorly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I think we have 2 or 3 other episodes rolled up in all of the things that you
I
just
know.
shared. And I actually think I know we have one that we are planning on doing where we're going to talk about evaluating your own, like
Yeah.
considering your own leadership. And then I've definitely also been thinking about something around what we need in our lives as leaders, like the essentials of being a healthy leader. So
The
we
core
might do
basics.
something with that.
That's probably a good idea.
Yeah.
I know
But let's
one that hopefully is going to be on that list, but I'm not going to say it right now.
Okay.
That's a weird thing to just announce.
Let's say it after we get done recording.
Okay.
So let's talk about it. Okay. So let's talk about what can you actually do if you don't have a title or role? What are some practical things you can do? Now, we are taking this back to episode 2, but we're going to go ahead and go through a list. We're not going to drill down on all these because it'll take us forever.
Well, we came up with 14.
In the day, we had 14.
Yes, it's so many. I said 14. To Esther when we were reviewing this, I said, it's so funny because on episode 2, we were totally cool with having 14. And it was probably because we were scared of filling time, right? Like we want to make sure we had enough content. And now we know that's not a problem.
Not a problem.
Don't need 14. We probably would have consolidated this list.
Yeah. So we'll go through them. Maybe we'll just kind of like each pick one or two that we want to talk a little bit more in depth about. But I'm gonna kick it off. Okay. And again, these are things that you can do. So just if you're looking for a practical takeaway from this episode, literally write these down, go to the show notes and copy and paste them, whatever, and think about how you can practically do this in your life today. So the first thing is doing things that other people won't do and showing up when others don't. Like
that is number one.
Very number one.
Yes.
And it's something that you may not even get noticed for it, honestly, because if other people aren't doing it and other people aren't there, they won't see you doing things behind the scenes. But it's such a way to lead by showing up. And then number 2 on the list is serving those you lead. Yeah. So it's basically a way to serve people.
Yeah.
By being the person who's humble enough to say, you know what, I'm going to get there early. I'm going to leave after everybody else has left. I'm going to, I'm going to scrub the toilets because no one else is willing to scrub the toilets. Like humbling yourself to not be like, well, I'm leading, so I have to be on stage, or I'm leading, so I have to be the one running the meeting. Well, maybe you're the one that's got to sweep the floor after the meeting, Yeah. So those are a couple things. The third one is listening. I mean, this is like core basic communication skill.
Person 101.
Yes.
If
being
you are a
good human 101. But we say that, but also it's really hard to do. Right?
Oh, absolutely. It's a skill.
I've been in a few meetings this week and I just keep realizing how much I talk. And I'm like, Esther, shut up and just listen to some people for a minute. Like funny. Sometimes you are someone who, if you're listening to this podcast, you might be someone who really has a lot of good ideas and you're driven and you want to succeed and you've got expertise and wisdom to share. But sometimes we just have to stop and listen to people.
Yeah. And not the kind of listening that I often do where my brain has about 45 people talking while the person is talking. And really, I'm just quietly staring at them while my brain is having its own meeting. That's not listening.
And you're just waiting until they stop talking so you can say at least one of those things that's popping into your head.
Yes.
I think we've all been there.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I would add to that listening is like asking questions, becoming a good question asker. I mean, so important as a leader. Like leadership is a lot of coaching. Coaching is asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
So
leading people to the conclusions. That they need to be. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I think another one is identifying the need. Okay. Let me say this again.
That was so good, Holly.
I know. Sort of the next step after listening is identifying needs and finding ways to meet them. And I think that goes into this to serving, showing up when other people don't. I think this all is all part of the sort of the same idea. But meeting the needs of those around you, I think is huge because it shows that you have an awareness of what's going on, and you can't have that awareness without listening.
Good.
So it's just like very like one after the other. And then I think another thing that you can do without a title or a role is identifying in people potential that they don't see themselves, and having the character to be able to speak into their lives in those areas. So it's not just hey, good job, right? It's like, you really impressed me with how you communicated and how you clarified, and you really helped the team by what you said at this time. We weren't be able to move forward until you did XYZ. Giving people really specific encouragement and seeing things that they can't they might not be able to articulate themselves, I think is huge. And I know for a fact that probably 90% of the leaders that we've had on this podcast have talked about people who have done this for them.
Yeah.
And as leaders, as a Christian woman leader, I want nothing more than to encourage other Christian woman leaders. And I think this, to me, is like the pinnacle. Maybe not the pinnacle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a huge one for me
Mm-hmm.
because it's seeing yourself through someone's eyes and not just listening to your own narrative in your head that sometimes gives people the push to take the next step.
Yeah.
There was lots of things. I had a mentor that said all kinds of these things to me and helped me take next steps that I would not have taken if she had not said those things to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop beating a dead horse, but
well, no,
that was huge
think
to me.
I think that's huge. And I think we all have different gifts and things that will come more naturally to us.
Yeah.
And when we're talking through this list, like, don't beat yourself up if you're like, oh, I am not good at like more than half of that list, because that's normal. Some of us are better at, serving than communicating, whatever. But I just want to say, like, I've seen this in action, and I've seen it because my husband does it really, really well. He sees potential in other people and he encourages them in their gifts in a way that just blows my mind. And I'm like, how did you even, like, I don't even know. And I see what that does for other people when he speaks into them.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely an inspiration, because I am so much more likely to see what's missing. And so to focus on seeing potential of what someone can do, or a gift that someone does have, and encouraging them in it, I think it's such a key gift. And like you said, it's so impactful for the person receiving that.
Yeah.
So definitely something I want to get better at.
I'm glad that you mentioned Scott, because as you were saying that, I can literally think of at least one or two sentences that he said to me. And these are like years old at this point, that I can literally think of the exact sentence he said to me that I'm like,
gosh.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe he said that. And it was so impactful. Like, so you don't know the things that will lodge in people's hearts that they need to hear.
Yeah.
So, okay. Yeah. I know we're supposed to probably not go line for line, but I'm going to do it anyway on this one.
Okay.
Because I think that this one needs a little bit of explanation. So one of the things we said was communicating a vision for the future. And that sounds very much like something that you need to do as a person who has a role, right? Because there's a specific vision for the future in either your company or your ministry or for your role or department. But I think this is something you can do without that. And what I mean by that is, and this may be more aspirational than like a vivid vision. I think a lot of times this is connected to your why. So why are you inspiring the team? Why is it important for you to listen? Why is it important for you to be a leader to these people when you don't have a role? And for me, it's like, well, I want to encourage other leaders. I want to have more female representation in leadership positions. I want a future where I have a seat at the table. I want the next generations to have things I didn't have. And like, I know that those are aspirational, but if that's informing how you act and that is part of your, how do I want to say this? It's part of your language that you speak
Yeah.
to other people, you are creating a vision without necessarily diverting what someone else is doing as a leader. You are sort of saying, okay, like we want to have this greater vision, this aspirational vision where, you know, and it sounds like pie in the sky, like a better world, world peace, all that. But
Mhm.
it's true. Like we are able to do this podcast now because of the women that have come before us.
Yeah.
And that's not something to take lightly.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah. It's good. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go to the next one. And this is one of my favorites, but bringing clarity.
Yeah. You're good at this.
So important
Yeah.
as a leader to bring clarity. And again, this, like you're saying, Holly, sometimes some of these items on the list are things that maybe are going to be a little bit easier to do if you have an official title. But even just in your conversations with those around you, in the way that you connect, in the way that you communicate the vision, like if you can have clarity and you can help others find clarity, it's going to make a big impact. So yeah, I think it's important. And I think sometimes it takes that inner reflection to get there, because if you don't have clarity for yourself about what the vision is that you have, or what you want to have accomplished in your team or in the group of people that you're around, then you're not going to be able to bring clarity to other people.
Yeah.
You kind of got to get it for yourself. So that's one.
But
Another one.
Oh, well, just really quick. I think that part of this bringing clarity, you may not actually, like you said, you may not actually know what the clarity is. Sometimes asking the right questions, like almost being a champion for the group. Like, we're not quite understanding this. Can you help us understand XYZ?
Yeah.
Or can you help us understand the why? Like being a champion for clarity, I think is a part of this. Like you don't actually have to be the one that says, here is the clarity everyone needs. Here's the key.
Yeah.
Like, here's the golden key. Like you are just championing clarity in wherever you are.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That's really, really good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to hit on the next couple and kind of lump them together a little bit.
Yes.
So commitment to personal growth and dedication to continually moving forward. I think we already talked about that, because you talked about self-leadership, which is kind of along those same lines, like being committed to continuing to grow. And then we have celebrating wins, which again, I feel like goes hand in hand with like that idea of seeing potential in people and identifying the needs of other people. It's being in tune with the people that you're around. And we do this, like, again, I keep referencing work, but like I see so many good examples at work, but we just do a thing called shout outs at the end of certain meetings at times. And like people just shout each other out. And so it's really a fun way to celebrate other people. And that's not coming from the leaders. That's coming from team members, you know?
Yeah.
So, and then also I found that making a point to keep a mental note of where I see other people really killing it, and then saying that in a meeting in front of them and other people, and saying like, you know, I've seen how Holly is doing XYZ. She's really amazing at that. Like, I think she should really contribute to this project that we're going to be working on. And that does a lot to show you as a leader, but it also builds up the team members around you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that this next one actually kind of goes along with number one. So the next one is responsibility for outcomes. And honestly, I think that this sense of responsibility is kind of what leads us to do things that other people won't do and show up when other people won't. So it's while maybe what we're talking about is responsibility for the end goal, I think we can also look at it as responsibility from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
You're showing up when others don't, but you're also showing up when it turns out well, and you're showing up when it turns out poorly. Like you're
Yeah.
there to engage with the process, what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, to not gloss over things, to just be really honest about stuff. So
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I really think that challenging the status quo really goes along with personal growth, honestly, and being willing to have sort of a high standard of things. Like, we're not just going to sit back, we're going to actually push forward. And that's from a personal level. So I'm going to push forward to have personal growth, but I'm also going to encourage those around me to have growth within our department, within our company, within our ministry.
Yeah.
Like, what are we growing towards? What's the next step? So I think those all kind of go together.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing about that one. I think this also is one of those, being the type of person who isn't willing to just accept this is the way we've done it, so that's how we need to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, you can be the person who speaks up and questions that and says, hey, is that really the best approach for this thing? Or are there other options? And that's part of challenging the status quo. And it does, again, it takes some nuance. It takes knowing your audience, knowing, the decision makers, and understanding some of that before you really go guns a-blazing about it. But you also, don't, if you have a gut check, or you just have you have some wisdom, some experience that says, hey, this thing that we're doing is not going to work, or there's this other thing that might work better. Leaders don't keep that to themselves. They find a way to push back on decisions and on things, because they know it's going to be for the good of the group, the organization, the program, whatever it is. So, okay. We've got two more.
Yep. You want to do them, or?
I'll do them.
Okay.
I think they're very hand in hand.
Yes.
So, being sensitive to the Holy Spirit's guidance. Like, again, we are talking as Christian women here, and a big part of leading is being sensitive to the Holy Spirit, and like asking him to be part of your everyday life and part of your decisions and part of your leadership. And then with that, following the example of Christ and being led by him. We already talked about that when you were talking about like being willing to follow others and how well do I follow. And so ultimately it starts with following Christ and, following his example. And again, he was a servant. He was humble. He didn't demand respect. Like, there's so many things that we can learn from Christ's example of how he lived his life on earth. And when we do that, if we can follow him, and again, we're not going to get it right. We're not going to be perfect in this. But when we make that our goal, and when we are committed to living under his leadership and being sensitive to the Holy Spirit, we are going to end up gaining influence with other people, because they're going to see that lived out. Mm-hmm.
So I think those two kind of underscore all the ones before, right?
Uh-huh.
Like,
yeah.
This is
probably
actually,
just say those two things.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think it's easy when we kind of parse them out a little bit. It makes it easier for people. But in essence, it truly is about following the Holy Spirit's guidance and being led by Christ. So I totally, I will say that when I looked at this list, when I listened to the episode, other than just the fact that we could have consolidated them, there's a couple things I think we missed.
Okay. All right.
So I'm not going to go into them like crazy deep, but I'm going to say a few things that I would add to this list.
Okay.
6 years later. Is it? Yeah. It's not quite 6 years. 5.5 years later. So number one, that you can do that I think we missed is have integrity. Right? Like,
key, very important. Yes.
That one, it requires no explanation. Just have some integrity. You do
Just
not
be
have
the
to have
same
a role
person.
or title to
Just
be
be the same
integrous.
person
Yeah.
in public as you are in private.
Yep. Yep.
Boom. Done.
Whew.
Okay.
So much there.
Don't get me started.
Yep. We're not going there.
We can't.
Nope.
Okay.
Okay. Another thing I think that's important is to sort of be aware of what's happening in the greater world. And what I mean by that is like your industry or the church world or society as a whole. I think oftentimes, and what I guess the purpose for that is in maybe in ministry or in church, like this is how the world is going. How do we need to be? And that's how do we need to act, but also how do we need to respond in a way that the world can digest what we're saying to them.
Yeah.
As we've said before, we're not changing the message, but we might be changing the method as to how the message gets across. And that changes based on where society is at, right? Like,
yeah. And the culture that you're in.
Yes.
It's different here than it is in the Middle East and different in Africa. Yeah.
And same thing within your industry. What's happening within your industry if you're in the business world? Who are the other movers and shakers? Who are the innovators? Like what's going on in your industry? So I think being aware of that is super important. And then the next one is emotional intelligence. That has been kind of a thread through this entire episode is having emotional intelligence, discernment, being able to understand nuance, all of those things. That is something that I would absolutely add to this list. And then the last one is commitment to self-awareness. And I think that non-self-aware leaders get themselves into trouble a lot. And we don't want to be that person. I don't want to be caught unawares of my own self. Now, we all have blind spots.
Yes.
And that's not something we're ever going to overcome. We will always have blind spots.
Yeah.
But once we cultivate our own habits and our own self-leadership, when we cultivate mentors, relationships, having those key people, being led by the Holy Spirit, like those are all things that makes the acknowledgement of an error or a sin or a mistake or whatever, it means it will be handled well. And so that's, I guess, what I mean by a commitment to self-awareness, that you're willing to handle your flaws, your sins, your mistakes well, and you're looking at yourself often. Yeah.
I agree with all of that.
Okay.
I think you're brilliant. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so what we want you to walk away with from this episode, and kind of, again, part of this was like for our own processing of this topic, is just to remember that you do not have to be in an official title or role to be a leader. That leadership is about influence and about whether you're, the people that you're influencing are your toddlers at home, or your, small group at church, or your humongous company that you're the CEO of. Like, you can have varying ways of doing that, but it doesn't mean that you have to have that title or role. And these things that we've talked about are things that hopefully you're doing and cultivating, even if you don't have a role right now. But especially if you do have a role, like definitely do it. But yeah, we just want to encourage you and kind of remind ourselves, as well as we're both in a season of transition and change, that we need to be pouring into ourselves as leaders.
Yeah.
And continuing to develop the habits and continuing to hone our skills and get better at things, so that we are prepared if and when there is a different opportunity or a different, position that God puts us in. So,
very, very true. I think that if we take this time to just sort of sit back and relax, that when the opportunity presents itself for us to join where God is working, we will not be prepared.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm saying that to myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to wrap up our episode,
Okay.
as we always do, with a fun question of the day. Okay.
I'm excited to hear your story. You told me you had a story.
I do, but I'm going to make you answer it first.
You are? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Did you ever get in trouble at school as a teen? And if so, what for?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious probably what I got in trouble for. And it was 99.9% my mouth. That's always been my trouble. Yeah, so talking when I wasn't supposed to, being sassy. I didn't do a whole lot of like disrespecting teachers. That wasn't really a thing, but I did like the witty quips that were like on the line. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I wasn't actually personally disrespecting them, but I was like pushing the envelope, you know?
Yeah.
And depending on the teacher, they either saw that as like really smart or completely disrespectful.
Okay.
So
yes, I can very much see that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I did have a class or two that I would sneak out of. But I never snuck out of school. Isn't that funny?
Okay.
Like I would just like hang about or go to a different class or just like go to my locker or
That's
just
funny.
like not be in that classroom.
Did you get in trouble for not being in the class? Like, did you get found out for that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like,
okay.
I never did it. See, here's the problem. I love to think that I'm like a rebel, right? But I don't ever really want to get in that much trouble. So I'm really good at like pushing all the boundaries, like going right up against all the boundaries, but still pretty much staying in the box. Like I would never just go out of a class that like we were learning something because I always wanted to get good grades.
Okay.
But like if we were doing busy work or something that I deemed personally as my teenager self not important, then I would leave. So
that's so funny. Okay.
Isn't that weird?
That is funny.
Doesn't that sound just like me?
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
I'm nervous that you were a wild rebel.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think that I got in trouble in high school?
No. Oh, so here's the thing. You were a goody two-shoes. I know this about you. But there are some stories that make me question your goody two-shoesness.
Well,
so I really don't know how to fall on this.
Okay. So, yes, I was very much a rule follower growing up and very much wanted to get all the good grades and do all the right things and not have anybody be mad at me. Now, I would say I didn't do a good job of having integrity in high school because I was very good at putting on the facade of doing all the right things and being very very good, but doing a lot of things that maybe weren't the best choices that people didn't see. But that's not what this is about.
Okay.
Well, it sort of is, but but still in school, generally speaking, I did not get in trouble. Yeah. I mean, I was not going to the principal's. I didn't get detention. Like that was not a thing. Yeah. I didn't talk back. Like I just, but when I met my now husband,
oh no,
it was my senior year of high school and we started dating and it was probably like, we're probably in the last 2 to 3 months of school.
Okay.
Before I graduated high school. And he convinced me to skip school for an entire day and go down to Acadia National Park.
Oh,
and
Esther.
I did. I skipped an entire day of school. I went to school, dropped off my sister, and then left. Like I actually drove to the parking lot of the school because I had to drive my sister to school.
That's amazing.
Left school. I don't know if I came back and picked her up. I don't remember that part of the story, but like I met Scott and we went down to the park. Went to school the next day. Listen,
Yeah. Okay.
nobody said a word to me. I did not have a single question about where I was.
Yeah.
My mom didn't get a call.
Yeah.
I got away with it. Free and clear.
Okay.
I didn't even tell my mom about it until like I was in college.
Well,
And this is the thing is that I had people so convinced
Yes.
apparently that I was
Yep.
such a good person that somehow they must have just thought I was, I don't know, in the bathroom all day.
sick or yeah. See, I was thinking that like part of the reason that I didn't really get in a ton of trouble for any of the things that I said or did, like going out of the like not being in class or whatever, was because for the most part, my teachers were like, "Well, she's a good student. She's conscientious. Like
Right.
I wasn't making trouble for them. Do you know what I
Right.
mean? And so they were
Yeah.
just kind of like, whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's
Right?
the thing. I mean, my grades were fine. Like there was nothing,
Yeah.
I don't even know. Like it's funny to me when I look back because I'm like, I just
Mhm.
if I don't know, if my daughter skipped the whole day of school, I'd be really mad.
I know, me too.
But like, I don't know. It was a different time back then.
Yeah, it was.
I also took a bus trip from Maine to Virginia when I was
this
16.
is crazy. The moral of that story for me is what was your mother thinking?
Exactly. See, I
But
think my
it was
mom
a
gave
different
me
world.
way too much freedom when I
Yeah.
was younger.
Yeah.
And I think about that. That's only 1 year older than my own daughter right now.
I know.
She's
I
not
would
going
never
on a bus
let Eli do
anywhere.
that. No. No, I bring Eli everywhere. And I remember like walking in the house and be like, I'm going to this friend's house. Bye. Boop.
Yeah. Right.
And like my friends would just come over with their cars and pick me up and we would go, oh, I'm going to the mall. Like that is not, no.
I have listened to one too many
yes.
true crime podcasts.
True crime podcast. Yes.
That's when I listen to the podcast that I listen to now and I think about that bus trip that I took with my friend. And like literally we were like at a bus station at 3 a.m. in like New Jersey or something, you know? It's like, it is a miracle we are still alive.
Yes.
It is. It's really.
Every time we've talked about that story, and the more like, I remember like you telling me it, and then the next like section of the story, I would be like, what? You did what? And then you did what?
Oh, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
Yeah.
But again, I had permission. Like we had both of our parents. Somehow my mom and her parents were okay with this happening.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. But again,
my
that was the 90s.
Me do a lot of things like that too. Like, I mean, not exactly like that, but pretty close.
Multiple, halfway down the eastern coastline.
I mean, we traveled a lot. Like, as far as like we moved around a lot, we went a lot of places. And so, like, as far as navigating situations kind of out on my own, I think my parents felt pretty comfortable at like 15, 16, 17 that I could figure out how to get myself home or get myself to a safe place or whatever. I don't even know.
Yeah.
Because now I think like, oh, I mean, we didn't have GPS. We didn't have cell
phones.
We didn't like, the other day I was thinking about it, or I was talking to my son and I was like, do you know that when I was a kid, my mom would say to me, I'm going to the store, and we would have zero contact with her until she got home. That's terrifying. Like something could have happened to her. She could have never come home. We have no way to call her. Something could have happened to us. Yeah. And she was just at the store. She would have known until she got home. Like,
yeah, we're in a whole
crazy world that we lived in.
And we lived in a definitely, you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, what are you guys talking about? Just, there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
Because,
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
some of the things I think about now, it's like, we've gone way too far. But
Yeah.
also other things I'm like, I am so glad that my daughter has a cell phone and that I have location sharing turned on and I can see where she's at any time.
I mean, can you think about
Like-
how glorious it would be to go to the grocery store and not have someone texting you, calling you? You know what I mean? Like, I don't love the
Just that-
grocery store, but
Just that 20 minutes of peace and quiet.
yes,
if you walk through
exactly.
Target. All right.
Wow.
Well,
Okay.
we have gone way off the rails from our original question, but hey, it's the end of the podcast.
Yes.
And this is why we save these things to the end. Because, you know, we just, if you're done listening before we
Extra.
get here, it's okay.
It's an extra for
All
you.
right. Well, thank you, friend, for being with us today on the podcast. I'm going to ask you to do a favor. If you listen to the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast and you like it, you know, hey, why wouldn't you? If you're still listening, I've got to believe that you like it to some extent.
If you're still here,
Can you,
you
share
might like
it
us a little bit.
Yeah. Share it with a friend. Tell a friend this week, hey, you should subscribe to this Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Because, you know, we took a little time off. We had a
It was
little
good for
crazy,
us.
weird year. And 2023, whatever,
It's
water under the
over.
bridge.
It's over.
It's over.
That's all we have
We're
to
back.
worry about.
We're
Yes.
back in 2024. We're going to be producing new content. We are bringing
Yes.
new guests on the show. We've got stuff coming for you. And so we want you
We're
to share
excited.
this with your friends because we need
Yeah.
like a little boost. We need the
Yeah.
algorithm to like get this podcast
Remember
back
us.
in the front of people. So
Yeah. It's
share
okay.
it with a friend. Thanks for joining us on the Christian Woman Leadership Podcast. Do you want to become a more confident leader? Then make sure to grab the Confident Leader Manifesto. This is a resource that Holly and I developed just for you, and I share all about it in episode 6, Leading with Confidence. You can get the manifesto for yourself at estherlittlefield.com/confident. And that's confident with a T. Now don't forget, your leadership matters, and it's time for you to embrace your gifts and lead with confidence. All right, we're in our evening vibe right now.
Welcome to the episode. We have a podcast. You are listening to it in your earballs. Good job.
I'm going to put that as the outro. Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh. Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I can't stop laughing.